Hi, today we are talking about Canada and the push towards Confederation. Though we all know that Canada used to be a colony of Britain and that it gained its independence a long time ago, roughly 150 years ago now, few of us understand the major push factors associated with that independence. This video will examine the big idea of Canadian independence from the UK by reviewing what was happening in the mid-1800s in the areas of government, military, and the economy that caused Canada, that we know today, to first come together. Before we get started on that, let's make sure we understand the rapidly changing names of the provinces now known as Ontario and Quebec. Prior to the rebellions of 1837, we had separate colonies of Upper Canada, where the cursor is now, which is present-day Ontario, and Lower Canada, present-day Quebec. The collection of British colonies, which now make up central eastern Canada, were then known as British North America. After the rebellion, the Lord Durham Report, or the Durham Report, suggested that Upper Canada and Lower Canada were joined together. This was essentially a ploy to assimilate the French. This unification happened in 1840 and Upper Canada became Canada West, while Lower Canada became Canada East. These names were more self-explanatory for those who did not know which way the St. Lawrence River flowed. The two areas became one colony, which were known as the United Provinces of Canada, or simply the Province of Canada. Now in 1867, the United Provinces of Canada joined with Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, Nova Scotia here and New Brunswick here, to become the Dominion of Canada, usually simply identified as Canada. In the process, Canada West became Ontario, and Canada East became Quebec. Since the early days of settlement, Ontario has been primarily English-speaking, while Quebec has been primarily French-speaking. So essentially, Upper Canada equals Canada West equals Ontario equals English-speaking. Lower Canada equals Canada East equals Quebec equals French-speaking. Now back to the founding of Canada. Confederation, which the founding of Canada was known as the Confederation of Canada, as you see in front of you, is the union of smaller groups into a larger one. In the case of Canada, they were referring to the unification of several British colonies. Got it? But now, the main point. Why did we do this? Here we go. Relations in the government of the United Provinces of Canada after their unification in 1840 was quite acrimonious. Acrimonious, you say? Yes, that's right, acrimonious. This was caused by two major things. Number one, was the number of seats was balanced perfectly between Canada West, the province dominated by the English, and Canada East, the province dominated by the French. Trying to get Parliament to work together was difficult because of the enormous French-English split and the fact that these two colonies had equal amounts of power. Therefore, no single party was ever able to gain a majority of their own. Therefore, the governing parties had to create coalitions between multiple political parties to gain a majority of the seats and therefore to form a government. As you see above, the definition of coalition is a temporary alliance of political parties forming a government or of states. The problem is these things were often very temporary. Now, the reason for that was that Parliament was full of something that we called loose fish. Loose fish? Not those loose fish, these loose fish. Though these guys don't look like loose fish, they were nicknamed loose fish because, like a fish loose in the bottom of a boat, they had a tendency to flip-flop around, except they were flip-flopping between political parties that they became aligned with. The loose fish were often members who sat as independents, and an independent member is those not officially part of any political party, or by members who would gain personally from switching to support the other side. Because government often held a very slim majority of seats, these loose fish flopping from one party to the other would actually cause a government to lose majority and therefore have to resign. That means that it was tough to keep government working and tough to pass any bills. There was a constant election cycle. Because of the combative nature of the English and French in Parliament, and those loose fish, the government was very unstable and got very little done. The second big reason we're looking at is military. So the Confederation was pushed because Canada was scared. Scared of what, you may ask? Well, they were scared of our Americans to the south. The Americans had twice in the prior 100 years been at war with the British, and there was no love lost between those two sides. Think, if you're Canadian, of the rivalry between the Toronto Maple Leafs, who happen to be the best team in the NHL, and the Montreal Canadiens. The USA had 10 times Canada's population and had just gone through a civil war, so were heavily armed. So 3 things you have to think about. Firstly, the Americans had been allowing pro-nationalist Irish people based in the US actually attack Canada because what was then a British colony was at war on the other side of the ocean with the Irish. The USA then allowed those same Fenians to come and take refuge in the USA without punishment. Annexing, otherwise known as taking over the British colonies, would also serve 3 wonderful purposes for the Americans as well. First of all, the expansion of American territory. This was otherwise known as manifest destiny. It was the American belief that it was their God-given right, that's right, God-given right to take over all of North America. This would give them access to vast amounts of natural resources and land. Number 2, annexing the British colonies in North America would reunite the American people, which had been torn apart by civil war, by giving them a common enemy, Canada. And this can be seen from the little picture above, Uncle Sam on the left, which is the symbol of a strong America, pulling in a weak Canada from the British Dominion. And thirdly, taking over the colonies meant that the British would be off the continent once and for all. With all of these reasons to be scared of the threat by the USA, the United Province of Canada looked to their mother country, the United Kingdom, for protection. However, the United Kingdom said they were absolutely uninterested in another war with the Americans. Canada was left to figure it out on how they would defend themselves. Now, the third major cause of Confederation was based around economic factors. As a producer of raw resources, Canada needed trading partners to export their raw goods to, and to import many of its manufactured products from. Not surprisingly, our 2 main trading partners were the USA, to the south, because of their close proximity, and the United Kingdom, because of our colonial status. In the 1800s, we'd established very strong trade with the east coast of the United States of America. In fact, we had free trade with them. That's right, Free trade existed long before the 1980s Canada-US Free Trade Agreement and 1990s NAFTA Agreement. It existed in the 1800s. It was called the Reciprocity Treaty. The root word, or reciprocity, literally means an exchange or trade-off. They could export goods to our country without paying a tax, and we could do the same to theirs. Problem was, protectionist politicians in the USA decided in the 1860s that they would be getting rid of this reciprocity treaty. That would make trade with the USA more competitive and therefore less economically beneficial for us. Our other big trading partners, the British, were making much the same type of decision. They had a set of laws called the Corn Laws. These laws allowed corn and other grains to enter into the United Kingdom from its colonies, absolutely duty-free. Like with free trade to the USA, this kept the price of Canadian grains cheaper than non-colony producers, and meant our grain exports to the UK were very high and prosperous for us. Unfortunately, the UK repealed or took away these laws, which had a huge detrimental effect on our economy. Due to the end of these corn laws and the upcoming loss of the Reciprocity Treaty with the United States of America, the colonies looked to each other in an attempt to grow trade, and there was no better way to do this than to unite and come up with a much more comprehensive plan. So in the end, Confederation was not something that the colonies found as natural. Progress towards becoming more independent. It was forced union of the British North American colonies caused by political, military, and economic factors. Do you think John A. Macdonald would have imagined in 1867 that this forced union would turn into the great country we have today? That's for you to decide. Thanks for listening.